Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on the planet. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. And I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation. Nature does an amazing trick. It uses everything. Wherever there's an untapped source of energy, nature facilitates the differentiation of species to evolve a creature, large or small, that will consume that energy. Human industry, unfortunately, went the other way, deciding to dump every leftover or item of waste instead of finding a use for it. And the consequences are a society that is burying itself in its waste and that cannot live within the planet's ability to provide resources each year. The transition to a green, carbon, and resource neutral economy will see many companies, communities, and nations begin to tear down the arbitrary walls in which they operate today to create circular flows of materials and energy at levels of efficiency that we cannot even dream of from the confines of our take, make, waste worldview. Our guest today, Chance Cutrano, is blending two activities, rice and fish farming, to reduce the emissions associated with rice fields while creating additional income for farmers. Chance is the Director of Programs at the Resource Renewal Institute in Fairfax, California. He led the launch of the Fish in the Fields program that lowers carbon equivalent emissions, that's methane for the most part, created by rice farming by as much as 66%. Fish in the Fields recently won the 2023 JMK Innovation Prize from the JM Kaplan Institute. Farming is an excellent testing ground for integrating previously disconnected industries. For example, last year we talked with Lundberg Family Farms' Bryce Lundberg, who has embraced regenerative approaches to growing rice that supports migratory birds during the winter months when their fields are flooded. Farming, which can be closely tied to nature when it breaks with industrial thinking, is a natural incubator of complex systems that minimize or reduce waste while contributing to the restoration of biodiversity. It might be the place that business will eventually learn regenerative practices. You can learn more about the Resource Renewal Institute and Fish in the Fields at www.rri.org, and then look for Fish in the Fields in the navigation. Let's get to the conversation. Welcome to the show, Chance. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. Fish in the Fields, really interesting way of blending a number of different activities in order to create a lot more efficiency and profit. Where did you launch Fish in the Fields, and tell us how it works?
Yeah, Fish in the Fields was launched in California in the Sacramento Valley, which is the northern central valley, which is California's main rice growing region. And the founder of my organization, Huey Johnson, who is one of these environmental titans of American conservation history, he was sitting in a duck blind looking out at a rice field in the winter, and often they're flooded in the winter times for duck hunting purposes, things like that. And he just thought, like, wow, this vast amount of water, what else could we do with this land simultaneously? And lo and behold, as he dug into it, he found, so many scientific papers about the history of fish and rice co-cultivation that, in his words, he was saying, you could hang those academic papers from a clothesline from here to Southeast Asia, across the Pacific Ocean, because it's such a historic and important agricultural practice around the world, and that information and that indigenous wisdom that we were looking to really inform the work in California and in the United States that we launched. So we started with putting salmon into rice fields in the winter months to fatten them up on all of the plankton and the food in the water column, because these are often former floodplains that had been reclaimed for agriculture. And over time, that project, as it became more successful, it spun off to a sister conservation organization called California Trout, and the California Rice Commission, and they're continuing to do that work with salmon and things like that. But we decided to say, okay, on the dry side of the levee that's not connected with the river, is there an opportunity there to work from a, commercial aquaculture perspective? And that's where Fish in the Fields was born, about 2012. Started to experiment with trout, golden shiners, fathead minnows, other types of small finfish
Mm-hmm.
that may have been or could be in these former floodplain ecosystems. And what's the grow out look like? What's the earning potential, and what are the ecological benefits of reintroducing finfish into these former floodplains, these rice paddies that are acting as seasonal wetlands in the winter?
So now you're using minnows, and tell us, the farmer places the minnows, or how does it work? What's
Yeah,
the process?
yeah. So I'll give you like a calendar year process, right?
Mhm.
So March, April, fields are prepped for to be flooded and then seeded with rice for a 120-day growing season for rice.
Mhm.
Um, Following that, fields are drained. Rice is harvested September, October, and then fields are basically worked a little bit
Mhm.
for the next growing season, but also, there are different processes for removing rice straw or, uh, you know, trying to grow a second rice crop called retuning, or even stomping the rice straw into the fields and then reflooding the fields or burning the fields is something
Mhm.
that still takes place in some parts of the United States and California less and less because of air quality issues. But once the fields are flooded, either intentionally by the farmer to break down the remaining rice stubble or rice straw, um, the or by rain,
Mhm.
because these clay fields are just holding all of this rain throughout
Sure.
the wet season. That's when Fish in the Fields comes in. So it's in late October, early November. We, our nonprofit, the Resource Renewal Institute,
Mhm.
coordinates with rice farmers and fish farmers, and we bring fish to those fields and stock those fields for all the winter months through February into March. The fish are out there getting a free lunch. It's the same water that had been out there already. The fish grow out, in good conditions. They double their size, double their weight, and do a bunch of other exciting things, which we can talk about too. And then the fields are drained, fish are harvested, captured in a channel or a catchment basin towards the drainage at the outflow box in the field, and then the process repeats.
So you are managing this, or the farmer manages it? How's that?
Yeah, at present, we've been managing the logistics. I think
Okay.
the off season frequently is a time for a farmer to, you know, plan
Have
for
a
the
look.
next year or go, take a break and enjoy their hard work from the main growing season. And so we've been stepping in. I think as it scales, it's going to require more technical assistance from, the US Department of Agriculture extension agents, or from academics, or from other NGOs, to support farmers, or a B Corp or some sort of entrepreneurial endeavor that fills that gap that we're currently filling. But it's very early stage at present, and we're still, piloting these projects around the country.
So the farmer can earn additional income. How does the fish living in the fields change the methane profile of the rice paddy?
Yeah. So that's been one of the more groundbreaking pieces of the work. Of course, anybody could throw a fish into a pond or a field and see what happens. I think what we discovered in 2016 is some work from a colleague in Finland, and the colleague's name is Dr. Sean Devlin, and he was looking at these lakes that were emitting a lot of methane emissions, and he had the idea, you know, that there should be organisms in these ecosystems that are making use. Like,
Right.
nature doesn't make waste. So what are the reasons for all of this methane efflux? And are there, these microbes, which we'll call methanotrophs, which methane eating or methane oxidizing bacteria that convert it into some form of energy. So what they did is they put a curtain down the middle of this lake, and they put fish in the ecosystem. And then the other side of the curtain, there were no fish. The hypothesis being um, these microbes are probably under some form of grazing pressure from plankton in the ecosystem because there are no fish in these lakes. So if we
Right.
put
If the
fish in
fish
these
eat the
lakes,
plankton,
exactly. Exactly. What I try to tell folks is it's very similar to um, reintroducing wolves into Yellowstone, right?
Mhm.
Like induces a trophic cascade when you put a new top predator in the ecosystem, and it regulates all of the other systems beneath it. In the case of Yellowstone, you reintroduce wolves. Now the deer have to put their head up and look around more frequently because there are predators in the ecosystem. They're not just grazing all day. As a result, you have less denuded river ecosystems and less denuded fields with all of the foliage that comes back. Healthier rivers. It affects insects. It affects the birds. There's studies that show you could look at the point in time when wolves are reintroduced in Yellowstone by seeing bird population changes in South and Central America. So these are like big biomanipulations. And similarly, when we put fish in the fields, based on that research that Sean had been doing, we started to do that in rice paddies in California, and we were finding similar effects. That when we put the fish into rice paddies in the wintertime, we were having significant impact on methane efflux, and it was, confirming this hypothesis that when you reintroduce finfish into former floodplain ecosystems, they start to regulate everything happening in the water column. They're consuming all the zooplankton in the system, and as a result, it relieves these methane oxidizing bacteria from grazing pressure, and so they can convert all the methane. So we took that to Arkansas, where we have these, incredible partnerships with University of Arkansas and Arkansas State. And we have these flux towers that are actually measuring methane emissions and collecting samples, like 20 samples per second of methane
okay, so this is
throughout.
an ongoing tracking of your methane emissions. This isn't just a hypothetical, we think it does, it changes this. You're tracking it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's, based in this ecological theory. We
Mhm.
tested it out and measured dissolved methane in the water column in California. And
Mhm.
so we were doing measurements, but they were kind of point in time measurements. And we said, if this is going to be, a durable solution, we need to be able to prove out that we have continuous data. That's the big issue right now in climate and carbon sequestration work on working lands is,
Mhm.
measurement, reporting, and verification, MRV, and making sure that you can point to really strong, compelling data and then be able to replicate it, right? So we partnered with these folks that have these really expensive. It looks like it's like a creature from the Matrix or something. These eddy covariance flux towers, and they sit in each of these fields. We have two fields that are each about 70 acres, one with fish, one without fish, and they're
Mhm.
constantly measuring all sorts of things in the water as well. But the big thing is the methane coming off the fields.
So, given the fact that you're measuring the methane emissions, which of course are carbon equivalent, are you thinking that you're also going to be able to generate revenue from carbon credits to support the program?
Yeah, it's something that we've looked into. And it's on the horizon. I think it's something that the rice farmers are excited about. These same farmers and some of their their colleagues have participated in carbon markets before, in the voluntary markets. I believe Microsoft actually acquired some carbon offsets from these very rice farmers because they've been on the leading edge of conservation and climate work, and that was part of the reason why we sought them out and wanted to partner with them. They've been doing a lot of the research on alternate wetting and drying to reduce methane emissions during the growing season, and it's been really the like frontier work in the United States for conservation and climate work on rice. So yeah, I think they're already accustomed to, you know, how those systems work, which is good. I think we have a little more work to do regarding protocol, but it's out there as an exciting possibility, less in terms of sequestration, but more in terms of carbon avoidance markets, because, you know, there's still carbon that's going to be leaving the system. It's just the equivalents change dramatically, as you know. Methane is, depending on what your time horizon, it can be 25 to 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So the methane oxidizing bacteria are converting this methane, but there's still some carbon leaving the system. So it's yeah, work in progress.
Sense. The other area that you have an impact is in terms of biodiversity, and it has to do with the use of the minnows once they're harvested. So how are they, what uses are they being put to, and how does that reduce the need for harvesting for pelagic fish in other areas of the wild?
Yeah, and I'd say the impact is two-pronged on the biodiversity front. I mean, this project's definitely conceived of addressing the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis simultaneously, which is part of the beauty of the nature-based aspect of it all. But the first one, to your point, is you know, we're harvesting so many fish from our oceans. We've encountered a number of companies that are seeking out sustainable, traceable, alternative protein sources that are nutritious, and that goes for, you know, aquaculture feed, that goes for pet food, and then, you know, even as you open the aperture, you know, human consumption to some extent as well. And we've definitely been partnering with pet food companies, as well as sustainable aquaculture company, land-based aquaculture, salmon recirculating aquaculture systems that are looking not to replace their feed with soy or chicken or, you know, something else that then it creates more headaches, but, you know, is there a true sustainable protein source that they can plug in to their fish meal for their land-based aquaculture system? Because salmon and some other species need some fish protein is the argument that some of these companies are making. So we're trying to figure out how we might supplement those diets, and how these fish, you know, as we scale up, are going to be able to serve a couple of different markets, and relieve some of the pressure from ocean harvest forage fish. Of course, it's the scale of harvesting forage fish or krill or all these things from our ocean is so dramatic. I don't want to say that, you know, this project is the silver bullet for that, but I think it gets us thinking about how do we do more with less? How do we, you know, bring more efficiency to these landscapes and really use these resources wisely and get more yield per field. So there's that piece of it, which is definitely, you know, there's a restoration aquaculture play because we're using native fish, just like the salmon work that we pioneered in California in rice fields. Then there's the offset of ocean foraged fish or a sustainable protein source for a commercial play. But then there's also the fact that, like, a lot of these fields are at risk of conversion to other crops, especially true in California, where you have, orchardists that are moving their walnut farms or almond farms from the southern Sacramento Valley up to the northern Sacramento Valley, or southern Central Valley to the northern Central Valley, where there's more water, more guaranteed water, as people clamp down on regulations about groundwater. And we're trying to find additional incentives for rice farmers that can stack on top of all the other incentives to ensure that they keep these fields flooded in the winter months for migratory waterfowl and shorebirds. These fields are surrogate wetlands. They're providing food, energy, and habitat for all sorts of species that make up the Pacific Flyway, the Central Flyway, et cetera. That we have 4 flyways in the United States, and they're critical linkages.
Migratory bird routes is what a flyway is, just to make sure everybody knows.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, in terms of ecosystem services, or, what the benefit to all of us is from those habitats, it's billions and billions of dollars. And we're not going to conserve every rice field, as permanent wetlands. So the idea is, can we embed our agricultural practices within, nature, essentially, and try to make them work for both,
We definitely need to dig into that a little bit more, but we need to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back with Chance Cutrano. Now back to our discussion with Chance Cutrano. He's the Director of Programs at the Resource Renewal Institute. Now, Chance, we're talking about a re-envisioning of our relationship with complex webs of energy flows at the most basic level here. But how did we lose the ancient practices? You mentioned that in Asia, for instance, rice paddies have been used for multiple purposes for millennia. Where did we go wrong?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one of the things that gives me so much hope about how we regenerate and find new solutions, leveraging our working landscapes to, restore biodiversity and mitigate and adapt to climate change. But I guess the quick thing is, a lot of these practices are still being done in Southeast Asia, and the United Nations refers to them as globally important agricultural heritage systems, which is a mouthful. But I think when I was studying in Vietnam in 2014, I was noticing even then, I got to see some of these practices, these polyculture systems at work. It was duck and fish and rice, and they were trying to, as you say, make all these energy flows, feed into each other in this virtuous cycle. The pressures of having a high value crop, or the pressures of having, enough uniformity of a crop that it could be competitive in a global export market or in global trade or things like that. I think those economic pressures have changed the equation. The increase of yield over time to feed a hungry planet. Obviously, rice is critical, as fish is critical too, for global nutrition and health. And as we try to increase yields, as we try to become more competitive in global trade, I think people before me have made decisions, during the Green Revolution, for instance, that we need to decrease complexity, we need to increase uniformity and consistency, right, in that way that we decrease risk. And as a part of that, you get all the animals off the landscape, or you get the different diversity of plants off the landscape, and you focus on one thing. You do that one thing really, really well, and there's efficiencies of scale. And then, in order to make that happen year over year, you start to, get like, I don't know, golden handcuffs or something, but it's you end up relying a lot on nitrogen, fertilizers and phosphorus inputs and things like that that are mined from other parts of the world and brought to growing regions. And so over time, I think we become more reliant on external inputs and trying to increase yield and increase efficiency of production. And
So as we stand and focus on one thing, we actually end up losing all the benefits, the many financial benefits as well as ecological that you talked about, and have to replace those things with other artificially made industrial materials like processed nitrogen. That seems so boneheaded. How do we
yeah, I mean,
how do we wake people up to the opportunity to reintegrate complex systems?
well, I think we're already on that path. I mean, it is unfortunate, as you say, that over the last, I don't know, 150 or 200 years, we've broken all of these systems and tried to figure out, a better path forward. But the amazing thing that I'm experiencing right now with Fish in the Fields, which gives me so much hope, and I think it's just one of the many projects that are proving this out, but the technology that exists today, like these flux towers and the drones that we use and the satellite data that can look at, the large landscape level at habitat fragmentation and methane emissions and water conservation. Like all of these tools can be stitched together to do what I was referring to earlier as MRV, to be able to better measure, better report, and then verify conservation practices on the landscape. I have so much hope that, and it's not a technologist like utopia sort of thing where like this tech and AI and all these things that's all we need, and then that'll save us. We can get into that in a second, but like, I do have hope that these tools are shedding a light on all of these indigenous practices or these ancient traditions that have been done for thousands of years that knew all along that there were really efficient ways to do things, not efficient in terms of, how many bushels of X can you drive out of this landscape, but efficient in terms of how much food can you derive for humans while also sustaining all of these other fragile and important ecosystems and things that are at play that we can't easily discern. And so it's really exciting to know that we're at this point in human history where we can validate the incredible technology and wisdom that's been passed down for thousands of years, and we can tweak it and we can pick it back up and polish it off and figure out how to make it better. But that's the exciting thing for me, and what I hope Fish in the Fields does as a signal globally is reinforces the work that subsistence farmers and rural farmers and indigenous communities have been doing and have been continuing to do despite the pressures to simplify or reduce complexity or scale up yields for export or things like that.
Well, we clearly understood as a species that intuitively that we were getting a good return from the effort that farmers were practicing these ancient traditions were using. But to your point about the addition of satellite imagery, of drones, of the ability to put sensors in many places, the organizations which used to focus on one thing, because that's about all we could manage, now have this information that allows us to recognize new opportunities, not just for biodiversity and regeneration, but for profit. And so I agree. It's not that we are going to solve the problems with the technology, but the technology can help us recognize when we've solved the problems, even using these practices that were abandoned because of an unfortunate turn to specialization that happened 150 years ago. So I'm curious, you won $175,000 from the JM Kaplan Prize. Is that going to kickstart expansion for the program? How are you planning on using that new resource?
Yeah, it's been honestly like so incredible and shocking to have received that that national recognition. And it's a game changer for us. I think, like many nonprofits, feels like you can be walking around with a tin cup all the time. But to have that that funding will allow us to complete all of this landscape level research with a number. It's a real interdisciplinary team of academics, and also with the family farms that we're working with, and making sure that they're getting some support through this work. They've been very generous in donating land and water and technical expertise and all of these things, because they want to see what's possible too, right? But I think the funding will allow us to carry this project forward, finish the next 2 years of, it's a 3-year study that we're doing in Arkansas on 140 acres. And that is going to be a big lift to get a paper out, to get this information out to government agencies, to get this information out to other rice farmers. But yeah, that's what we're focused on right now is, how do we afford the fish, the harvesting equipment, and support these partners that have all of this scientific equipment, but also the technical expertise, and the resources that make the project possible. And that's the flip side of the technologist perspective on, all of these things that are helping us do this work faster, better, with more consistency and things like that. It's the partnerships. That's a technology, right? Like bringing together these unlikely partners and getting everybody around the room and getting everyone excited about the possibility, and then all of a sudden 2 + 2 = 5.
Right. And showing them the connections. We literally ignored connections because they introduced complexity in systems that we're trying to keep simple. Now we have this opportunity to look bigger and broader, and really maybe go back to a sustainable life. That's really inspiring. Now, you guys do some other things too. Tell me about the Restoring Point Reyes project, for instance.
Yeah, thank you. So it's almost ironic that we have work on sustainable agriculture, improving working lands, but we also have this work to restore and protect public lands as well. Restore Point Reyes it finds itself in the middle of both of those things. Point Reyes National Seashore, for your listeners, is one of the most gorgeous biological hotspots in California. It's 72,000 acre peninsula in Marin County, just beyond the Golden Gate Bridge, just outside of San Francisco. It's probably one of the closest wilderness areas to a urban metropolitan area in the entire United States. But Point Reyes is home to elephant seals, bobcats, coyotes, and the endemic Tule elk, which, both elephant seals and Tule elk are some of the greatest restoration stories in California history. But the Tule elk have come back from literally like 20 elk that they thought had been extinct, and they put them back at Point Reyes National Seashore. Now there are about 5,000 of them throughout the state of California at a number of wildlife refuges. But Point Reyes is the only national park where they exist. Alongside the Tule elk at Point Reyes, it's home to about 5,000 or 5,500 dairy cows and beef cows, and I should say beef cattle. Over time, these cattle ranchers have become the sort of main activity in the central part of the park, which is called the pastoral zone. And with climate change and decreasing water and other issues, we're finding there are all sorts of these negative environmental impacts associated with ongoing beef and dairy ranching within the national park, especially for the Tule elk, but also for water quality, for contact recreation at beaches and things like that. And so Restore Point Reyes is this national effort coalition to figure out what's the future of Point Reyes look like, and when will
You're talking about competition. There's competition for this resource. There's competition within the natural resources, the elk and the cattle and so forth. How do you get people to see the benefit of creating a real balance?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that project. I think many environmental leaders around the country would say that project was seemingly intractable. That things wouldn't change out there. I've been working on it for about 10 years now, almost 10 years, and at the start it was a lonely discussion to say, hey, these elk are dying from massive die-offs during drought conditions in California. Meanwhile, the cattle are not. And so what's going on in terms of resource distribution here? Unfortunately, it took a second die-off for the public to really mobilize around this issue. But it's, nature bats last, Mitch, and we are seeing, even if we want something to happen on the landscape, like conditions are changing and there's a new abnormal. We can't just go forward with business as usual. I think that reminder is compelling for people when they, even if they want to see X, you have to plan for Y and Z. And so we, out at Point Reyes, we've been collecting information. We've been trying to synthesize best available science, and then we're seeing ongoing conditions changing out there. And so we've been calling for, the restoration of the national seashore, essentially, the reduction in commercial activities in the national park, especially like extractive activities where we're, raising animals out there at the expense of the wildlife that need this refuge. So that's what that project's about, but it's been a long haul.
Well, that brings me to the question that I introduced in the introduction. I guess that's repetitive, but you're building complex ecosystems with institutions and practices that can be applied in other parts of the economy. Can you, if you would, summarize what you think you've learned from Fish in the Fields about seeing beyond the mental and organizational boundaries that we live in today? How should we rethink our relationship with any resource or any energy flow?
Yeah, I think the big learning lesson from Fish in the Fields, I think there's this like temporal aspect is, a lot of different stakeholders, whether they're human or more than human, are using these landscapes and using resources, and we don't even know it. And of course, heron and egrets and ducks and geese and cranes, we can see those. And sometimes maybe if the water's drained, we can see the fish too. But we can't even see the microbes and all the other things that are making use of resources in these ecosystems. Mm-hmm. And so it's, starting from there and recognizing that there's already an incredible complexity inherent in making any of this stuff work, this miracle of us all being here together right now, all the way to the microbes in our guts, right? I mean, it's crazy how complex things are. But the other thing is this nature doesn't make waste. I think that's huge, and of course we talk about it in recycling and composting and things like that. But it's really helpful for thinking about any systems where we're seeing pollution or where we're seeing degradation of biodiversity or of, air and water and things like that, it's usually an indicator that something's out of balance.
Yeah.
And
Well, and it also sounds like that's an indicator that there's an opportunity to create new value, and that unfortunately we've always treated complexity as a challenge rather than an opportunity.
yeah, I love that. I think it's great to reframe challenges and problems as opportunities. And I think Fish in the Fields is an example. Like you never know when you get the right people in the right place at the right time,
Exactly.
whether or not you're going to be able to unlock
Yeah.
some incredible value and tell some really beautiful stories. So
Well, Chance,
yeah,
that's a great place to end this really interesting conversation. How can folks follow along with what you're doing?
I think honestly the best way is to check us out online at rri.org. And you could subscribe from there to the different projects. We do ocean conservation work, river conservation work, the national park protection, public land stuff, as well as the sustainable ag work in rice and with fish. So yeah, that's probably the best way to plug in. And please just reach out to me, send me an email. We always love having people in for lunch if you're in the Bay Area, or happy to just communicate via email.
Great. Well, thank you, Chance, for spending time with us today. That was my conversation with Chance Cutrano,
Yeah,
Director
thank you
of
so much,
Programs at
Mitch.
the
Appreciate
Resource
it.
Renewal Institute, and that's based in Fairfax, California. You can find out more information and sign up for alerts about the Fish in the Fields program and other projects at www.rri.org. Chance expressed his optimism, which I feel too, that massive changes are underway in the way that we make and use resources, such as the staples that people rely on for sustenance around the world. It was the introduction of industry, which in simpler technological times required specialization, that frankly oversimplified our relationship with the environment and allowed us to ignore a lot of the damage that we were doing. But the rise of computer and communications technology over the last 30 years has given humanity the tools to see into systems and understand them better. That can allow specialized organizations to begin to diversify, either by creating new capabilities internally or by partnering. And MRV, that's measurement, reporting, and verification, gives society the tools to place a value on, as we heard, the avoided methane emissions from rice fields, amongst many other things. So a turn is underway. But when you're standing on a massive ship, it's hard to tell that the turn is happening. However, you can see that across the economy, companies, governments, and communities are recognizing where energy and resource flows are being choked off, lost, and wasted. And that presents new paths to sustainable and profitable living. So stay tuned for more rice field coverage. I hope you'll take a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 450 interviews that we've done here on Sustainability in Your Ear. If you take a moment to write a review on your favorite podcast platform, that'll help your neighbors find us. Please let them know that you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of their favorite podcast providers. Folks, you're the amplifiers that'll help us spread more ideas to create less waste. So thanks for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.